I've been a gorilla for weeks, but it's still so unnatural. I'm not used to being this outrageously sexy.
Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron. Whoa!
I assume somebody just selected you to race, but what kind of surprised animal orgasm noise was that supposed to be?
You caught the bit I was trying to do, but I didn't know how sincere to make it, and it just kind of... Because you can't... There's no way that bit doesn't just come off eye-rolly. So
yeah, no, that's why I avoided the whole thing. I thought about it. I thought, well, I could do, a high pitched like stopwatch man. I could do a masturbating badger. I could be Conker, but before he became like the lewd Conker, the lewd drunk Conker, I could be like chimney sweep Conker. I could be many things, but I decided I would just be myself because for my own mental well-being, I need to be happy with myself. So, anyway.
Yeah, I took one for the team and tanked a joke there.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's all right. The first of many.
Off to a good start.
It's the first of many, and it's good because the first one is always the hardest. But now we can just be as painfully as unfunny as we want to be because that Band-Aid has been ripped right off. So this is the Diddy Kong Racing Spotlight Kongversation. We are here. It is the 20th anniversary of Diddy Kong Racing, the birth of the Donkey Kong universe. I mean, technically, Donkey Kong Country is the birth of the Donkey Kong universe, but up until the point of Diddy Kong Racing, we didn't realize it would be an entire universe. It was just a singular series for the most part. Diddy Kong Racing expanded the world of Donkey Kong from just Kong Country to a whole rare archipelago. And when you look at the games that have influenced DK Vine, the Kongversation, the weird fan community we reside in and help shepherd, Diddy Kong Racing is probably one of, if not the most influential games out there. It's certainly probably the most important when you really get down to the fine nitty gritty.
At the very least, DK Vine in its current form would not exist if not for this game.
Yeah, we would be probably a Donkey Kong website, and that's it. A Donkey Kong Country website, and that's it.
And we may have not survived the mid-2000s.
No, that's just it. We are a Rare Shared Universe website and community because of Diddy Kong Racing. And really, what I wanted to do with this spotlight, we're planning it to be 2 parts. I know in the past, we were like, okay, this one's going to be 2 parts, and then it becomes 3 parts. Oh, this is going to be 3 parts, and then it becomes 4 parts.
So, will part 2 of this episode just be part 1, but you play it backwards?
Yeah. No, actually, it's going to be just a remake of this episode, and you have to use a stylus.
Now I know what voice I should have done.
This is not... Let me just be upfront about something. This is not going to be a celebration of Diddy Kong Racing DS. One day, we will do a spotlight episode for Diddy Kong Racing DS, but that will not really enter any discussion we have over the next 2 weeks. This is going to be, first and foremost, about the Nintendo 64 Diddy Kong Racing, the best Diddy Kong Racing. And we're also going to try to refrain from making any Kevin Callahan jokes. I suppose we'll get into the legacy of Diddy Kong Racing at the end of next week's episode, but This is going to be an exploration of not only Diddy Kong Racing the game, but Diddy Kong Racing the legacy, and, as far as this week is concerned, Diddy Kong Racing the prehistory, the build-up to Diddy Kong Racing. Because one of the really interesting things about Diddy Kong Racing, Cameron, is that Diddy Kong Racing is a game that has had one of the weirdest pre-release periods. And I'm not even talking about development here. I'm talking about when the game was announced up until when the game was released, which was essentially a month and a half. It was ridiculous.
I look at the timetable of this, and you think, like, the kind of promotional period we see with a modern game. I mean, like, say, we've known about Sea of Thieves for going on 3 years now?
Yeah. I mean, it'll be 3 years come E3 next year.
Whereas Diddy Kong Racing, it was like half a year, wasn't it?
The only equivalent we have had on DK Vine, discounting games that are, by our definition, Donkey Kong Universe, like Goldilocks and the Little Bear, that just kind of came out of nowhere. And I know I'm the only person who cares about Goldilocks and the Little Bear. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Cameron. I know you have the Goldilocks and Little Bear series of tattoos in your unmentionables. You know, you've got Goldilocks' father eating some pancakes with bacon on them. I know you're a big secret fan of it, so I apologize for stealing your thunder. But
unfortunately, I gained a little bit of weight, and Little Bear ain't so little anymore.
Oh, that's always a shame, yeah. But you can just pass it off as Papa Bear or whatever he's called. Shamefully, I don't have the character names memorized for that game. I know Royston, I know Goldilocks, I know Little Bear, and I think there's like Beautiful Bee or something. I don't know. I think that's a Matt Corneism. But anyway, enough about Goldilocks and Little Bear. You know, but with the exception of weird oddities like that, the only equivalent we've had to something as crazy as Diddy Kong Racing's turnaround time was probably Rare Replay, and that barely counts when you consider what that is.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it's still an impressive
It had to be an
feat,
anniversary release.
Yeah.
That's really it. They unveiled it and released it within the appropriate time frame.
Diddy Kong Racing was Nintendo's major game for the holiday season 1997, and they basically had to concoct a rush job promotional campaign for it. And the fact that it was successful, record-setting even, just, it's flabbergasting. And it's
Guinness World Record, fastest selling game, 1997.
No wonder Conker developed the drinking problem. But it's something that just builds to the legend of the game. And, you know, a lot of people, especially people who aren't part of this weirdo fan culture around Donkey Kong and Rare, they kind of forget how important Diddy Kong Racing is because it's tied up in all of this legal limbo, this kind of gray purgatory.
Even now, it just feels weird to say Diddy Kong Racing is something this big.
Yeah, I mean, modern Nintendo fans, the young folk who climbed on board the big N train following the release of, say, the GameCube or whatever, they have no conception of what Diddy Kong Racing meant at the time. So if you are one of those younger gamers, buckle in, because I really want you to go back in time with us to 1997, so you can get a good, clear picture of what Diddy Kong Racing meant at the time and why it was such a huge deal. And it's something that I've tried to convey on social media. You know, we have a pretty big Facebook following, all things considered, relatively big for us. And, you know, I think I referred to Diddy Kong Racing as a AAA release at one point, and somebody called me out on it and said, well, it's not a thing. And I was like, well, technically, yeah, this was before there were AAA releases, before there's that distinction. But, applying the modern standard to what it was in 1997.
We'll get into the marketing of Diddy Kong Racing, but yeah, it definitely was.
Yeah, it was. It was Nintendo's big holiday release. And it's just, there's never been as weird a big holiday release as Diddy Kong Racing.
I mean, you and me lived through it, and this is still like a weird thing to remember did happen.
Yeah, it was kind of just this blindsiding flurry of, like, you barely had time to get hyped for it. You were hyped from it from the start, but you barely had time to prepare for it because, I mean, it was there. Usually they would announce these things at E3, and you would have the entire summer to kind of, build yourself up for this fall release, this November Thanksgiving release. And Diddy Kong Racing, you didn't really have that. So let's go back, Cameron. Nick and I talked about Mumbo Jumbo last week, so let's get sucked into his time vortex, the swirling green and purple time vortex, and go back 20 years ourselves to 1997.
God, it's been that long.
Yeah, I know. When Banjo and Kazooie time traveled in Grunny's Revenge, they time traveled 20 years. That's the length of time between now and Diddy Kong Racing's release. So, some perspective there. We're not going to get frisky with any bees that I'm aware of, but anything can happen a month after Halloween. So, Cameron, 20 years ago, and you can sigh again if you need to. I realize. I mean, we're both getting up there in age, so you might have to sigh.
I need that precious oxygen, Hyle. I can't sigh.
You have to sigh just to shift in your chair because the joints ache so bad. 20 years ago, the transformation from what up until that point was just the Donkey Kong Country series, or maybe the Donkey Kong series with the pretty good graphics. I think I referred to it as the Donkey Kong graphics series at one point in my very early fandom. Because, I mean, between Country and Land, and then I guess Mario Kart 64, there wasn't a really good catch-all term for it. So
for me, it was just the Donkey Kong series, because there was a good period of time where I didn't recognize like DK Arcade as a thing. Because if you didn't already know about it before Donkey Kong Country came out, you didn't really hear about it for a good long while until DK64.
Even though Donkey Kong 94 had literally come out earlier that year.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who had Donkey Kong 94 on a Game Boy cart, and I remember looking at it like, why does the artwork for Donkey Kong look so weird on this? But I never played it. I think it was DK64 and Smash Brothers set me straight, but it was just a weird thing. Donkey Kong did not exist outside of the Country series to me at that point, and Mario Kart 64. But as we went over on another episode, I just thought that was a weird guest spot thing. Yeah,
and this was before DK Vine poisoned your brain too, so you already had these misconceptions before we got a hold of you. But yeah, so the transformation from this vague series, this ACM celebration of modern Donkey Kong into what we know today as the Donkey Kong universe, or Rare Shared Universe, if you want to be less shackled to Nintendo, if you don't want to be a chained Kong, as it were. This is when that transformation happened, and I've brought this up so many times on this show that people can probably drink themselves into liver failure if they take a shot whenever I bring it up, but I figured that we would be getting the Donkey Kong platform game for the Nintendo 64 in November 1997, because I didn't really understand how games were made back then.
You got Donkey Kong platformers 3 years in a row on the console systems and 3 years in a row on the portable systems.
I just figured
when you have absolutely no idea how much work goes into developing
Right.
for new hardware,
Yeah.
your brain just says, "Yeah, they got another one lined up."
Yeah, I just figured it would take a year to make it, or at the very least, because there were already rumors at that point in 1995 that Rare had already started work on Donkey Kong for the Nintendo 64, and that wasn't true, but I'm sure there were discussions being had, of course, and the way industry gossip worked back then, I'm sure that just counted as a confirmation somewhere down the
I like to
telephone
think
line.
had they actually gotten it out early, they would have released a sequel called Donkey Kong 65.
Yeah. Well, I think Clay Fighter ruined the whole middle finger to the 64 naming convention for everyone, because Clay Fighter did like 63 and 1/3, which was just a naked rip-off of the Naked Gun series. But anyway, with less O.J. Simpson, although he would have made a pretty good Clay Fighter, although his main attack stabbing wouldn't be very effective towards the Clay Fighters. Take that, O.J. out on parole, and the first thing you do is listen to the Kongversation, and you got slammed. That's right. It's what you get, O.J. So I don't know. But yeah, so I thought Donkey Kong World or Donkey Kong Universe or whatever they were going to call it, something certainly better than Donkey Kong 64, because Rare's not that lazy. It was going to come November 97, and then of course E3 97 rolled in, and instead they announced Banjo-Kazooie and Conker's Quest. And that was like a knife through my heart. We talked about it with Craig Duncan when he was on the show on Talk Like a Pirate Day, but there was a time when I was let down by a new Banjo and Conker game being announced because they were new IPs, and that was scary. I wanted the familiar old gorilla and his monkey friends, and I didn't want to hear any of this bullshit about Rare developing new characters, because I felt like it was being unfaithful to Donkey Kong. And so anyway, that kind of dashed my hopes for Donkey Kong being the November 97 release, the 3D Donkey Kong game. But 1997, earlier that year, had brought us the Spotlight episode we did back in February, Cameron, Mario Kart 64. And that was Donkey Kong's debut on the 64-bit console, and it got the system into my house. At the very least, I shoveled all of those driveways over the winter, made enough money to buy an N64 to get Mario Kart 64. And what Mario Kart 64 did was it gave me and Donkey Kong fans not only Donkey Kong on the N64, but it gave us a penchant to dream of something a little bit more. I've mentioned before how I would drive Donkey Kong onto the Royal Raceway Castle grounds, and it just felt like Donkey Kong was running around in Super Mario 64. And I just imagined what it would be like to have a 3D N64 Donkey Kong game made by Rare. But I also had other dreams, and one of them was sometime probably in the spring of 97, I vividly had a dream of racing as Diddy Kong in a Game Boy follow-up to Mario Kart 64. And I remember it was like Diddy Kong racing around on a Mario Kart 64 kart and this monochrome. I was playing it on a Super Game Boy, so it had like this green tint to it, but it was a very like vivid imagery. I remember like green hills in the background, even though this would have been like the
Well, they would have been green hills.
Well, yeah, but not that you could have hills on the Game Boy, as we saw with Mario Kart Super Circuit, the faux Mode 7, whatever you called it on the Game Boy. But so this idea that Diddy Kong could be in the next Mario Kart. Hey, we had Donkey Kong in Mario Kart. Why couldn't Diddy Kong be in Mario Kart? That was already an idea, floating around in my head, and I'm sure other Donkey Kong Country fans' heads in 97. So it was just kind of this slow walk towards what we didn't know at the time was the inevitable. So, as I said, E3 97 brought us Banjo and Conker, and Banjo-Kazooie was being published by Nintendo, developed by Rare, but like the Donkey Kong Country and Land games, it was being published by Nintendo, and something that a lot of people forget, in this day and age, is that the characters of the Banjo-Kazooie series were created to be new Nintendo IPs. And
right.
I'm not...
same with Killer Instinct. This wasn't an isolated case.
Yeah, and I don't know how this works. I mean, because, at this stage of the Nintendo-Rare relationship, Rare developed games for Nintendo. So even when it was Project Dream, I'm sure they were thinking, okay, well, this is, these are all going to be owned by Nintendo. These are going to be Nintendo characters. But let's see what we come up with. And I guess, whatever, agreement they had with Nintendo to publish this project, even though it took multiple iterations, it was that Nintendo would get the intellectual rights of all the characters created for it. I don't really know how it works, and I'm not sure anybody in this day and age even remembers, probably even the people involved in the process. But Banjo-Kazooie, Mumbo, they were all Nintendo intellectual properties up till 2002. And
there's even some nice pictures online of the Nintendo of America offices circa, I think, holiday 2002 with, I think they had more Banjo characters on the wall than, like, it's either more than Mario or more than Pokemon or the exact same amount.
Yeah.
But it's just weirdly prominent.
Yeah, it's something that it's hard to find too many references to, but I remember going into stores and seeing like Nintendo in-store displays in the electronics section, and you'd have Mario, Donkey Kong, Link, Pikachu, and there was Banjo and Kazooie right with them. It's something that I think, had things gone differently, had Banjo-Kazooie made it into one Smash Brothers game, I think a lot of people would view it differently. The younger fans that I mentioned previously, who don't really remember the historical context of the Nintendo Rare partnership. But yeah, Banjo and Kazooie were Nintendo characters through and through. But Rare had gotten so big and powerful since Donkey Kong Country's release. This was just an era where they were cranking out hit after hit, million seller after million seller, and they had enough clout and they had enough capital to publish their own games for, I believe, the first time ever, definitely the first time in this era. But Rare had been journeymen, for many years, releasing all of these licensed games. Of course, they had their own characters like Battletoads, but those were always published by people like, Trade West?
Trade West.
Yeah. So, for Rare to actually be big and powerful enough to publish their own games, that was a big deal. And E3 97, like I said, it saw Banjo-Kazooie, which was a Nintendo game, but Conker's Quest was going to be Rare's first self-published game. And what that also meant was all of the Conker characters were not owned by Nintendo. This was Rare properties. Now, sure, Nintendo had a financial stake in Rare, so it's kind of splitting hairs, but or squirrels in this case. But for all intents and purposes, Conker was owned outright and always by Rare. This was, kind of the dichotomy, the split between Banjo and Conker. Banjo, Nintendo, Conker, Rare. Just trying to lay the historical groundwork here. So another thing that is important to remember, very important to remember to this discussion, was that Banjo-Kazooie was going to be the big holiday release for Nintendo in 1997. From the moment it was announced at E3, this was the promise. Banjo-Kazooie, November 1997. So even with no announcement for Donkey Kong World or whatever, I remember once the initial disappointment of Banjo and Conker being announced had passed, something in my brain said that these games were somehow going to all exist in the same universe. And this isn't just me, like, retroactively trying to, put a feather in my young cap, even though I didn't wear a cap, because it's not. I remember studying those pages in Nintendo Power like they were the Dead Sea Scrolls. I was convinced there were some unseen connections. Obviously, with Banjo-Kazooie, it was easier to make that leap because Banjo was a bear.
The scene connection is that they were games starring furry animals with very similar CGI rendered art styles.
Yeah, I mean,
not exactly the same, but very similar.
Well, Conker was more stylistically different from Rare's Donkey Kong than Banjo was. Conker was very much, even in those early screenshots, it seemed like a Tex Avery cartoon. It seemed very much of a different mold than the pseudo-realism, cartoony realism.
Closer to what Diddy Kong Racing actually turned out to be.
Exactly. But this is before we had any inkling of Diddy Kong Racing existing. So
and before Diddy Kong Racing was Diddy Kong Racing.
Exactly. So, but of course, Banjo-Kazooie came out right after Donkey Kong, or was announced right after Donkey Kong Country 3. So the bear connection, I was like, well, Banjo's got different hands than the Brothers Bear, but he looks very similar otherwise, because, there's only so many ways you can do a cartoony bear in the Rare style. And so the summer of 97, they announced Donkey Kong Land 3, but that was kind of almost an afterthought. So besides, whatever hype you had for that, the summer of 97 was trying to make sense of Banjo-Kazooie and Conker's Quest. And whenever Nintendo Power would reference them, or you would get other gaming magazines to study screenshots there, you would just look for clues, hoping you would see something that would tie it back to Donkey Kong Country. So even that, I was jonesing for a shared universe because I desperately, something in the back of my brain told me Banjo and Conker will matter to you, even if it's not readily apparent what it is right now. And maybe this is some sort of latent psychic ability, or maybe it's just me hoping against hope that I could not only buy and play these games, but they would connect to this series that I loved. My very first time with a Rare game, hoping that it would be part of the Donkey Kong universe, even before I knew what that was. This grand tradition over the years where a Rare game is announced, and then we have to determine, is it DKU or not? So that's what was going on. And really, there is no evidence for this to be the case. And so the summer of 97 kind of just rolled on, and gamers everywhere were blissfully ignorant about what was happening behind the scenes at Rare and Nintendo. Oh, if we could have only bugged them, or have been a bug on their walls, to have seen what was transpiring, because it would have alleviated any fears I had. So there was panic going on in Rare, specifically among the Banjo team. Amongst the Banjo team? One of those two. It was happening. Because the Banjo team, I don't know if they had bitten off more they could chew, or they had more bitten off for them than they could chew. Like a mama bird regurgitating the food into the baby bird's mouths. They could not swallow what was being spit at them. And that was basically that Banjo-Kazooie had been promised to be Nintendo's big holiday game of 1997, and they knew there was no way it was going to be ready for holiday 97. So, Cameron, why don't you share with the people what we know about what was happening starting at E3 that year?
Well, we know that they went to E3, and yeah, Nintendo was going to push this as their big holiday release. There's an excerpt from an interview with Grant Kirkhope that Rare Gamer did back in 2010 that goes over a lot of this. Since the Banjo team went out to E3 that year, and Howard Lincoln was there, and sat down with them all in a conference room, and like essentially stressed like, hey, you guys know we're putting millions of dollars into the advertising budget, and we're definitely making Banjo-Kazooie our new big Christmas game, and that's right. Is that okay? And they agreed with them. And behind the scenes, I think there was just kind of, I'm just projecting myself in the moment. I can imagine this sort of like appreciation that so many people are going to look forward to Banjo-Kazooie this holiday, and then, oh no, so many people are going to look forward to Banjo this holiday.
I mean, I know from my personal creative endeavors, just, small scale stuff that has low stakes on DK Vine, I always bite off more than I can chew. I'm like, oh, sure, we can get that done before then. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, let's do 7 videos. Yeah, let's have them all come out next week.
And once you tell people that you're doing them, it's, oh no, this is real. This isn't just something I'm talking about now.
Yeah, I'm always overly optimistic about what I'm capable of and what like my team is capable of. So I could, if I were in that position, I'd be like, yeah, hell yeah, we're getting out by Christmas. And then once that adrenaline wears off, it would have been just this despondent, like white noise of despair. Despondent despair, that's right.
I'll give a recommendation to Rare Gamer, by the way. Look up this interview if you have the chance. Yeah,
Rare Gamer, good friends of the show. So I mean, we have anecdotes. I'm not sure if they're from this interview or not, but there were grown men in tears at E3 because they knew it wasn't going to happen. And so you have to imagine like what is going on at Rare after Nintendo tells them all this pressure's on you. And I'm sure like the Stampers had wind or knew like, okay, this isn't happening. We need to come up with a plan B. We've got to scramble because, they could have rushed Banjo out, but it would have done a disservice to Banjo-Kazooie. It would have taken, Rare's sterling image at the time would have taken a hit.
They needed those extra for Nintendo as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
You remember the state of the N64 library this time. They needed a holiday hit.
Yes. So absolutely. Also at E3 97, almost like as a matter of fact, this also happened. Right now, they aren't really related. Nintendo got to play another game that Rare had been developing, and this was behind closed doors. So this wasn't made privy to the gaming press, to Nintendo Power, or any of the outlets like GamePro or EGM. Nobody knew about this. Behind the scenes, Nintendo demoed a game a new team at Rare had been developing called Pro-Am 64. And Pro-Am 64 is a game with a long and winding history. But of course, we know it today as Diddy Kong Racing. So how did Diddy Kong Racing come to be? Let's go back and talk about the secret history. So there's some dispute over this, but the first, I guess, seeds of what became Diddy Kong Racing, or at the very least, the framework of the team that went on to create Diddy Kong Racing.
Yeah, we've gotten conflicting reports as to how closely these projects are tied.
Yeah, but basically, 4 people at Rare came together to start a new project. It was Chris Stamper, who was the lead engineer, Lee Shunman, who was the game director, and incidentally, Lee Shunman had first been hired to work on Donkey Kong Land 2. Lee Musgrave was heading up art at the time, and Rob Harrison was on software. So they met and they kicked around some ideas. and they developed this idea for a caveman / time travel related real-time strategy game. And according to Lee Shunman, this never really materialized too far.
Yeah, he says, in Lee's words, just before DKR, they did about a month's work on a strategy game in the vein of Command and Conquer, and it didn't go very far after that month, and it just, in his words, it looked like the racing game had more legs.
Yeah. Now, Lee Musgrave denies that they were ever really related. Like, he according to him, like there's no connective DNA between the two. I don't know what Lee Loveday has to say. Lee Harvey Oswald was unable to comment, having been dead for 30 years. So anyway, this caveman game never really made it past the conceptual, drawing stages, but they did, apparently, according to Shunman at least, they did use some assets from the caveman game for their next project, which was a racing game. They decided that a racing game would be fun, and considering that this was mostly a team of newbies, that it would be, I guess, something they could, really like sink their teeth into. It was an easy enough concept to grasp that they could then have some fun playing with. And they were influenced by Super Mario Kart for the SNES, and of course Rare's own RC Pro-Am, which is, when you really stop and think about it, the grandfather of these types of games. Obviously, it plays very differently from Mario Kart, but the whole kind of item-based mayhem, shooting missiles, oil spills, slippy stuff on the track. That RC Pro-Am was really one of the first games that kind of incorporated that.
I'll throw in a nod to a game they did for the Game Boy, Rare did for the Game Boy Color a few years later, Mickey's Racing Adventure. If you ever want to see like a weird mismatch of Diddy Kong Racing and RC Pro-Am, that's kind of what that game is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a lot of RC Pro-Am in Diddy Kong Racing by virtue of what it evolved as, but it's funny to me because RC Pro-Am is a game I played, in my youth, and had played, occasionally on the NES with my friend Elliot back then. He owned it, and so we would play it on his NES, and it wasn't until probably around the time of Diddy Kong Racing that I realized RC Pro-Am had been developed by Rare. And that I was like, oh my god, because there's like oil slicks, there are missiles, and it's funny I didn't make the connection until much later that Diddy Kong Racing had started life as an RC Pro-Am game, or had at one point been an RC Pro-Am game. But anyway, so Shunman was inspired by those two games, but he was also inspired by something conceptually completely different, and that was Walt Disney World. A lot of DK Viners are also Disney theme park aficionados for some reason, and so I find this interesting. Shunman wanted a game that was more than just cut and dry racing, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to incorporate the same feeling of, I guess, low-stakes adventure and a sense of discovery that one would get by visiting a theme park. Because theme parks, like Disney World, but like here in Virginia, we've got Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, which is, the theme of that is basically old Europe. And so each section of the park is a different, like, stereotypical part of Europe.
This is exactly how Diddy Kong Racing's world map is laid out.
Yes.
Everything's sort of got it put in its own little corner of aesthetic and theme.
Yeah. So, you've got this, like, linking overworld, and then as you enter this new area, which contains this world, the kind of theme, the scenery just dramatically changes, and it's laid out in these quadrants very much like a theme park would be. And so, this was pretty weird. When doing research for this episode, I was really trying to see how this thought process evolved. Well, let's do a racing game, but like it was Disney World. And I've never really understood how they arrived at that concept, but you got to hand it to them. I mean, the idea works. It's a really tough sell. I think it's an ugly elevator pitch.
I'm just imagining like how they went to the zoo to watch like the gorillas, that they all went on Disney's Autopia to figure this out.
Well, they'd probably go to Euro Disney, wouldn't they? So, which Euro Disney in this time in the 90s was infamously like just a failure because nobody was going to it. At least that's what I learned from The Simpsons, which was my my go-to for any worldly knowledge at that point in time. But yeah, this is just one of those things where the concept makes no sense unless you see it fully realized. And it evolved into this game that was initially titled Wild Cartoon Kingdom, which sounds like a theme park. You can definitely see that early influence in that title alone. And so they had, cutesy, anthropomorphic furry animals to be the stars of the game, the racers. And shortly thereafter, it was retitled as Adventure Racers, which I think is a less inspiring title. It's kind of more like matter of fact, but
probably less trademark friendly.
Yeah, but it might also be more market friendly because Wild Cartoon Kingdom would probably be a turnoff for anybody over a certain age, while Adventure Racers sounded more captivating. And at that point, they had an entire team brought in to start developing it. So this actually really started gaining traction around the time when it became Adventure Racers. And, we don't really know too much because this is from the point in time when Rare was still ultra secretive and you didn't see every part of the development process played out in a technical alpha. But we do know a little bit about Wild Cartoon Kingdom / Adventure Racers. And we do know that the, I guess, lead character at this point in time was Timber the Tiger. We know there was a t-shirt for the team, or a polo shirt that was embroidered with the logo of Wild Cartoon Kingdom, and it had Timber on it.
Really? I thought that was Pro-Am 64.
Pro-Am 64, yes, thank you. Well, again, there's a fine line between all of these
there seems to be a back and forth here. Like, Pro-Am 64 seems like the most long-lived title until we got to what it finally ended up being.
Yeah. So, but at a certain point, Timber became the star of it, and we know some other
really
characters
got the short end of the stick on how this development process turned out, didn't he?
Yeah, he got his own game usurped from him, but I mean, it was for the best. Timber, look, trust us, Timber. You got more notoriety being the second banana, no pun intended, than you would had you tried to anchor this game on your own. But there's Timber. There was a character called Astro Mouse who was actually a character from a scrapped Rare project who was then redesigned and gender swapped by Kev Bayless, and who became the character we know today as Pipsy. We know at one point there was a woolly mammoth dressed as Evel Knievel, which we only know that because there was a render in a magazine back in the day.
He's on like a little scooter too.
Yeah, well, a little tricycle, because at one point this game was all tricycles, like motorized three-pronged or three-tired bikes. So I assume that's what he's driving on, but it's hard to say. It's only conjecture, really. There was also this donkey character, not Donkey Kong, but a donkey who, like in it, classic Rare SNES era ACM graphic style. A donkey with a crab on his shoulder. I don't really know if this was going to be an actual character or if it was just like background scenery or what, but yeah, a donkey and a crab. And so anyway, these were the characters we know at this point in time. And as mentioned, it became Pro-Am 64 when they decided to really utilize elements from the RC Pro-Am series, the two NES classics. Well, I guess the first one is considered a classic. Not too many people know about the second one, unless, they played in Rare Replay. But like I said, motorized tricycles were the main hook at the one point in time. But we know from the embroidered T-shirt with timber on it and the Pro-Am 64 logo that eventually they did put planes and hovercrafts, I think, ultimately in this version. Although, according to Lee Shunman, when they demoed it to Nintendo at E3 '97, it was only with the trikes. So I don't really know.
I would love one day to know why it was hovercrafts and not boats.
Yeah, right. It's such a. I mean, Rare was really hung up on certain aspects during this time.
I mean, they could have tied it in with Cobra Triangle if it was boats.
Maybe hovercrafts, came about to further the Donkey Kong connection because Diddy Kong or Donkey Kong Country 3 did have a hovercraft in it. I don't really know. Like I said, it seemed like Rare was hung up on certain aspects.
I'm sure there was like a practically minded reason for it. It's just very interesting to me.
Well, hovercrafts can go over land. That's basically.
Oh, that's true because you had a lot of tracks with the hovercraft that were meant to, like you weren't gonna beach your hovercraft.
Right. But yeah, like they Rare seemed to be obsessed with hovercrafts. I mean, the whole reason I learned what a hovercraft was because of Rare. They were
me
obsessed,
too.
They were obsessed with bears. I mean, this time of Rare was like I said, even if this shared universe wasn't planned, and it was not, let's be clear, there were thematic links between what all the teams were doing at Rare that just made it seem like it was all meant to be. Back to E3 1997. They showed Pro-Am 64 to Nintendo, and specifically Shigeru Miyamoto. And according to Lee Shunman, he even beat Miyamoto in a round at multiplayer. Now, Miyamoto apparently loved the game, saw a lot of potential in it, as did Nintendo. But when it quickly became clear that Banjo-Kazooie was not going to meet that holiday deadline that they had already invested all of this money in, and even had fast food tie-ins and whatnot.
Giant Mumbo statue at E3.
Yeah. So when it became clear that, we're in trouble, Rare offered up Pro-Am 64 as a game that would plausibly be finished by what had been Banjo-Kazooie's deadline. So Nintendo asked for a pretty big change to the game that the team was not initially happy about. And that was make Diddy Kong the star. Specifically, Miyamoto and Nintendo had apparently offered them the choice of Diddy or Donkey Kong. And keep in mind that this was a big deal since this Diddy Kong Racing or Pro-Am 64 was going to be a game published by Rare. So Nintendo presumably had some less financial stake in this game than they would, say, Banjo-Kazooie. So for them to essentially gift one of their own IPs meant that they really wanted the game to succeed. And granted, the game had to succeed because this was all they had for Holiday 97. They were counting on Rare to deliver a game for them because they had nothing. Zelda was still a year away. Yeah, they were essentially said, you can use Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong.
And that's kind of amazing that a studio was this gung-ho about a racing game when they'd already put one out earlier in the year.
Well, that's something that's very interesting about this whole thing, and it's a point I want to kind of elaborate on in just a bit. The kind of quick revisionist history Nintendo had to pull out to justify Diddy Kong Racing. And I'm not going to argue with them because I vastly prefer Diddy Kong Racing over Mario Kart 64. I love Mario Kart 64, but Diddy Kong Racing is just so tailored to my taste that, of course, it's my preferred of the two. But yeah, it is pretty humorous that Nintendo had started the year with a game that was very similar and seemed groundbreaking at the time with Mario Kart 64, and then but here's the real car racing game for the holidays. So anyway, yeah, the team was opposed to this. They felt like this was like their project losing some of its identity if Donkey or Diddy Kong were going to come in and basically be the branding behind the game. And I presume that it would have had to have been the Stampers who would have really pressured the team to say, no, you've got to do this. And granted, the same thing happened with Dinosaur Planet when it became Star Fox Adventures.
I was going to say, I feel like Star Fox Adventures was revisiting, like, well, this worked last time.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work as elegantly because Dinosaur Planet was a more story-heavy game.
And also because Pro-Am 64 was never announced and shown off extensively before Diddy Kong was added to it.
This is like an interesting tidbit about all this. Like, a lot of this information we're spewing out, like, was not public knowledge until, like, the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense in retrospect because this game is so light on Kong elements.
Which never felt unnatural
nobody
at the time.
Would bat an eye at because it wasn't a Donkey Kong game, it was a Diddy Kong game.
Exactly.
Diddy Kong games have free reign to be whatever they want.
Exactly. So, yeah, anyway, I'm guessing the Stampers had a large role in, like, obviously they were the boss, so whatever they said, went. But the team relented, and Lee Schumann, has copped to, yeah, I mean, it's a good thing Diddy Kong became the star of the game because that's what sold it. Because this was still, Donkey Kong Country Mania had already kind of peaked and, it was starting to subside, especially in light of the N64's release and Super Mario 64 coming out and everything. But the Kongs were still very hot commodities at the time. They were still the upper echelon of Nintendo brands. And so Diddy Kong Racing prolonged that, essentially. Diddy Kong was still a very hot character at this time. He wasn't just considered that annoying character from Smash Brothers. He was one of the top 5 legit Nintendo superstars.
He was the star of 2 of the highest selling games on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, and this is before Pokemon too. So I mean, Pokemon was still a year away from hitting the West. Obviously, it was a big thing in Japan already, but so the team chose Diddy Kong, and that apparently really pleased Nintendo because according to the team, they felt like Diddy Kong was Rare's baby, and Donkey Kong was Nintendo's.
And good choice. Can you imagine how weird it would have been to have Donkey Kong and absolutely nobody else from DKC in this game?
Diddy Kong was such an elegant choice, and not only because you could do pretty much whatever you wanted with a Diddy Kong game, but it also just made sense as far as that character and his story arc.
Oh, yeah, it's thematic growth from DKC too.
Yeah, he became a video game hero and a contemporary of Donkey Kong's. So he can then go off and have his own games that have nothing to do with Donkey Kong. And it just made complete sense. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think the team was going for that. It's like, oh, yes, well, clearly this lends itself well to Diddy's growth as a hero. Like, no. It was just like, oh, okay, we can do more with Diddy. We're not going to, and also we're going to avoid comparisons to Mario Kart 64.
It was a bit of serendipity in the moment.
Yeah. Had they gone with Donkey Kong, then it would have just felt like, but okay, he was just in Mario Kart 64. What the fuck is this? Yeah, like, are we going to have Yoshi racing now? Are we going to have Wario? Like, where does it end? So, yeah, but Nintendo loved it, and this did set the precedent for the rest of the Rare/Nintendo partnership. Donkey Kong was Nintendo's to use however they wished, and Diddy was Rare's. And there's kind of a gentleman and gentlewoman's agreement going forward that Nintendo would never use Diddy Kong. And, Rare would obviously use Donkey Kong in Donkey Kong games, but otherwise Nintendo could do whatever they wanted with DK. And, of course, he would then go on to appear in Mario Party, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, and so on and so forth, up until the buyout, and then Diddy Kong started to, join him as a partner in many of those games.
I'm just imagining Donkey Kong coming back and meeting all of his friends on DK Island, and he's just exhausted all the time, and nobody quite knows why.
Yeah, right. Well, his mom died when he was playing golf, That's my fanon. So, the game was now rebranded as Diddy Kong Racing, with a release date of November 24th, 1997. Very quickly, other changes were made to the game to accommodate the Kong world a little bit. It was around this time, and we don't really know the exact. Like, there's contradictory information, but planes and hovercrafts were added. Planes, at the very least, were part of Pro-Am 64 at some point in time. Not sure about hovercrafts, but let's talk about the other Donkey Kong-ish character in the game. So we only have, I guess, assumptions here. But there is a character in Diddy Kong Racing who is identified as a Kremling, despite the fact that he looks nothing like any Kremling we had seen up until that point. And in a lot of the promotional materials leading up to Diddy Kong Racing, he's kind of signaled out as an alligator. And so the story that is Crunch, I presume he was originally a character who was in Pro-Am 64 or Adventure Racers or even Wild Cartoon Kingdom as an alligator. And then when Diddy became the star of the game, they thought, well, let's just let's just say he's a Kremling, because that makes sense, even though he doesn't have the same number of, I think he doesn't have the same number of fingers or toes or something. He doesn't.
Yeah, there's some weird bits about him. I mean, I think the Kremlings at this point had 3 toes. He has 4.
Okay,
I think was the big thing.
Yeah. So it was clearly a hasty retcon to make the alligator character into a Kremling, and I keep trying to dance around Crunch's name, because when it became Diddy Kong Racing, he wasn't Crunch at first. He became a character called Crash. Of course, Crash was the minecart riding critters in Donkey Kong Country. So if you're going to have a Kremling who drives around in a go-kart, Crash would be a pretty good Kremling, a pretty good drone to identify this Kremling as. But eventually, they decided to just give him his own unique identity as Crunch.
Probably also handy that it didn't phonetically sound identical to a Sony-related character.
Yes, there is that too. But I love the fact that he's not just Critter. Or this is a problem that Donkey Kong Barrel Blast ran into, because they had some unique Kremlings in that game, but they also had drones like Clump.
We may have even been going to run into it in Diddy Kong Pilot, because later builds of that game, they still obviously use Crunch, in appearance. He's still obviously supposed to be Crunch, but his name has been changed to Kremling, and he has, a high-pitched hillbilly voice.
Right. Which might have been like lended from Redneck Kong. I don't really know. But yeah.
But it's interesting. They may have gone back and forth on his name quite a bit. Like a lot of the internal audio files have names like Krem underscore or new underscore Krem.
Yeah.
And like I think maybe they had to like go in with new clips every time they changed his name or something, or just kept the naming convention simple.
I really want to know what his name was when he was just an alligator. That's something we have no... Like, it might have been Crash. That might just be a crazy coincidence, but I doubt it. So I don't really know, like, his alligator name or nickname or whatever was. Anyway, yeah, but not only did he become Crunch, the individual Kremlin, but he had a whole arc to his character, which I love. I love that this game... Like, there's a reason there are so many fan favorites in Diddy Kong Racing, and there's a reason we champion all of these characters to have spin-offs, besides the fact that, you know, technically, you know, there have been so far 3 characters in this game to get their own franchises, even though 2 of those were, you know, planned ahead of time. So anyway, yeah, but Crunch is great, and that was just a very, very elegant way to make this still feel like the world of Donkey Kong without marrying it too closely to what had come before.
It was also just fortunate that they could do this was before every game was expected to have an opening cutscene, so
yeah,
the manual story and like the promotional material for this game was able to flesh out a lot that the game didn't have to.
Exactly. And your brain could fill in the blanks too, like literally, like the story of Diddy Kong Racing, I've seen it play out in my head. I'm not even counting the Diddy Kong Racing DS, you know, cutscenes or whatever. I'm literally just reading that story. I can then, for 20 years now, it's just kind of crystal clear in my head exactly what it looked like. Okay, so all of this was happening behind the scenes throughout summer of 97, and up through late September, we still thought Banjo-Kazooie was coming in November. Like, Nintendo was getting all of their, I was going to say ducks in a row, but let's say frogs in a row, with one frog having a chicken plumage. So, going public. So, I don't know, because this is 1997, and it's that awkward year between 1996 and 1998 where I was not online. So I don't know how or when they announced Diddy Kong Racing on the internet.
I don't even think I had the internet at this point.
Yeah, like I said, this was after like we had America Online, but because they charged by something ridiculous, you know, like you get so many free hours, and then then you're basically on the clock for whenever you're online, and that will run up your phone bill. It was after that, and before they switched to just a flat rate. So Diddy Kong Racing might have been announced early September. I don't really know when. I didn't find out about it though until Nintendo Power came in the mail. Issue 101. The October 97 issue. And I believe, this was the last Donkey Kong Universe game that I found out about via announcement in a magazine. After this, because, Banjo-Kazooie I already knew about, Conker I already knew about. So after this, everything I learned about was online. So this was the end of an era, even though I had no way to know that at the time. So, a little personal anecdote, Cameron, about myself, before we get into how you learned about this game. In those days,
yours will be more interesting.
Oh no! Trust me. Home movies are never interesting. This is just going to bore everybody to tears. In those days, I was in 8th grade, and I would go home from school with my friend Elliot. His mom would pick us up. Basically, my mom worked till 5. My mom and dad both worked, till 5 o'clock. And it was either that, getting picked up by Elliot's mom, or I would have to ride the school bus for 40 minutes. And that was made even worse because in my school system, the middle schools were the last schools to get out. So we would get out at something ridiculous like 3:15 or something. So if I wanted to get home and have like time to actually unwind and not ride the bus with middle school jackasses who would, antagonize and mock, and I was very like unsure of myself, and middle school sucks. Anyway you look at it. So yeah, I would get picked up by Elliot and his mom, and then boom, done with school, done with the whole notion. And that meant that days that our Nintendo Power subscriptions arrived, we each had a Nintendo Power subscription back then, he would have his waiting for him in the Ford Bronco that saved us from school. And so I really...
This would have been the time to get in the OJ reference. You jumped the gun.
Hey, Ford Broncos, man, they're reliable. You can go on a low-speed chase and the police can do nothing. So I vividly remember this day. This is like one of those transformative days in a young man's life. Some people, remember when they lost their virginity. I remember where I was on that passionate day. I learned about Diddy Kong racing. So it was issue 101. Like I said, this was probably at the end of September. I can't really remember if it was like the last week of September, last week of the month when we get our new Nintendo Power, if it was like early in the month. But so late September, early October 97, Extreme G was on the cover of that issue. And by the way, I got Extreme G as a Christmas gift that Christmas, and it was a pretty fun game. I mean, it was a third-party Nintendo 64 game. It wasn't quite polished, but it was a fun little racer.
I had a friend with Extreme G.
Mm. So that was on the cover. Madden 64 had the line underneath that. There was an exclusive preview of Madden 64. Which I don't even remember what American football was like in 64 AD, but
if you ever want to find out, you can just go to your local secondhand shop and they'll have the entire wall papered in Madden.
Yeah, I think Madden 64 is like the black sheep of the Madden family.
I think if the key to like sustainable fuel is to just run everything on copies of Madden.
Yeah. I can't say I've actually ever played a Madden game because
I just know that I'm sure they're fine games. It's just they are treated as like some of the most disposable games I've ever seen year after they come out. At
this point, why don't they just do a new release for like one new release for 5 years, and then there's just a DLC update for the new season?
I've heard rumblings FIFA is apparently moving to like a subscription-based model, which sounds like a good solution to this.
Yeah. Anyway,
but
I'm
this
sure
is more time spent on Madden than it deserved.
I'm sure there are hardcore Madden fans that are as passionate about Madden as we are the Donkey Kong universe that will cry foul if they don't get their annual Madden release.
If there's a podcast called Mad About Madden, I will listen to it.
Especially if it's hosted by Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt. So Paul Reiser hasn't been accused of any sexual misconduct. I don't want to step in anything. I honestly don't know. Like, I don't know which celebrities I could reference at this point, but I'm just crossing off the list and hoping like Reginald Vell Johnson and my 80s sitcom stars are safe for now. So Donkey Kong Land 3 was like the big draw initially for this issue because there was a couple pages on Donkey Kong Land 3 because obviously Donkey Kong Land 3 came out around this time. So I remember thinking, Donkey Kong Land 3 in this issue. Woo! It's at the very bottom of the cover in the lower right-hand corner. Game Boy Double Play, Donkey Kong Land 3, and Tamagotchi. Wow. And then there's also Mischief Makers, F1 Pole Position 64, Aero Fighters Assault.
There are 3 racing games on this cover alone.
Yeah. And Mace, the Dark Age. Besides Mischief Makers, I don't know any of those N64 games. Anyway, so it was about like a 7-minute drive to Elliot's house from the middle school, from Montevideo Middle School, which is one of the circles of hell, no doubt. So we arrived to Elliot's house, and it was only then that I was the one who noticed it. At the very top of the cover, somewhat obscured by the red and black, checker flag background, it said, Hot Shots, introducing Diddy Kong Racing. I'm not sure what Hot Shots meant or what that had to do with anything.
Maybe like a pun on screenshots.
I guess, but I was like, it sounded like it was like a new feature in Nintendo Power called Hot Shots. No, just introducing Diddy Kong Racing. Cameron, have you ever had a 15,000 megaton nude bomb of joy just go off in your head? Like just this ecstatic moment in your life where
I'd say when we found out Diddy Kong was in Smash Brothers.
Was that the last time it happened for you? Like Donkey Kong Country Returns, maybe? Like Tropical Freeze? I don't know.
Hey, you said have I ever? You didn't tell me to name every single time.
Well, this is just one of those moments where it's like time stops, and you stare at this. You know these words, but you're trying to make sense of them because you've never seen them in this context. And you're wondering if you're hallucinating. You're wondering if you're just reading this wrong. Like you're rereading this and you're like, wait, what? That's exactly what this felt like. For this like very, very small, like indecipherable moments, there was this rush of both uncertainty and excitement, and then when it became clear, and I pointed it out to Elliot. I shrieked it out to Elliot. I was like, Diddy Kong Racing! What? And he saw it too. He corroborated, what I was seeing. And we were like, what does this mean? So we have to rush inside, and we started thumbing through the magazine, thumbing through it. We were looking for what's Diddy Kong Racing? Where in this magazine is Diddy Kong Racing? Is this just a weird typo on the cover? And then near the back of the magazine, we found it. Wasn't in Hot Shots, it was in Pack Watch, which was the upcoming games preview in the back of every Nintendo Power.
They had to change this name at some point after the GameCube launch. I forget what they called it after that. But it was a play on Game Pack.
Oh, okay. Well, Pack Watch had as its lead a 2-page spread on Diddy Kong Racing. So, Cameron, I think the best way to convey how Diddy Kong Racing was revealed, at least to subscribers of Nintendo Power who were sans internet, would be for us to read this entire article. I'm up for it. If you want to sit back,
do you want to start with the heading or the article?
I will start. We'll start with the heading. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, big changes are in the air this fall. A new marquee game appears suddenly from Rare. Hudson Soft teams up with Nintendo and Mindscape to bring N64 titles to North America, and Kirby returns to the Super NES. So, yeah.
Wow, Dreamland 3 was far out.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was like the last major. It wasn't the last Super Nintendo game, but it was the last major release from Nintendo, I believe. And I'm sure I'm wrong on that. I'm sure somebody will correct me. But anyway, Diddy Kong Racing. The first thing you need to know about Diddy Kong Racing from Rare is that it isn't Mario Kart 64 Part 2. So already, they
wanted to rush that out of the gate.
They are, because what this article was rereading it now. This is just naked hype. This is them attempting to build this game up as the greatest thing ever. And so it's like they had a list, a checklist they were going down. They had to hit all of these points to successfully introduce and hype this game to people, because they did not have much time to do this. So keep all of that in mind. All right. Let me just start again. The first thing you need to know about Diddy Kong Racing from Rare is that it isn't Mario Kart 64 Part 2. Yes, it has funky little karts, but there are planes and hovercraft too, not to mention bosses, special areas, bonus challenges, and hidden items. And yes, there are bananas, but you don't drop them in front of enemies. The truth of the matter is that Diddy Kong Racing is a completely and wonderfully new beast, and it's now heading the Nintendo 64 roster for this fall, replacing Banjo-Kazooie as the hottest title due to be released before the end of the year. In parentheses, Banjo-Kazooie will now make its debut in March 1998. Still way too optimistic regarding Banjo-Kazooie.
That is a really low-key way to announce a delay.
I know. So like they lay on all of this like flowery kind of Diddy Kong Racing is not this, but it is this and this and this and this. Oh yeah, Banjo-Kazooie's delayed, whatever. So what makes Dakar or DKR so special? As strange as it may sound, Diddy Kong Racing is a racing game that isn't about racing. Confused? Imagine the castle in Super Mario 64. Open the doors and the stars you need to win before you can explore new areas. Now imagine that instead of running and jumping, Mario is racing around each area in a vehicle, collecting gold balloons instead of stars. Those balloons will allow you to enter other areas and meet new challenges.
I want to issue a challenge to Mario 64 hackers right here on the show.
Imagine that you actually race through the different worlds while you're exploring them. So that not only do you have to find silver coins and hidden keys, you have to do it all while beating a bunch of other racers to the finish line. And on top of all that, you have all sorts of items to pick up. Items such as homing missiles, oil slicks, electrical shields, and of course, bananas. In parentheses, you collect bananas to add to your top speed. The game has 20 main tracks, 8 main characters, 3 types of vehicles, a huge outer world where you can explore to your heart's content and discover extra gold balloons, bosses, an Indian elephant genie named Taj. I liked how they just blatantly reference this ethnicity there. That's Diddy Kong Racing in a nutshell. Let's look under the skin. Okay. Rare is introducing a new proprietary graphics technology in this game, which is called real-time dynamic animation. One of the more spectacular results of this technology is the use of skinning. It sounds like they're going to do what I fantasized about doing to Nick, which is taking Diddy Kong and slicing off his flesh to make some sort of tasteful bit of decor, like a pillowcase. Skinning is a technique that takes a texture map and wraps it completely around a polygonal figure, like a character or machine. The resulting figure is much smoother and rounder than traditional polygon characters that have texture maps painted on each flat surface. But enough of the shop talk. The graphics in DKR would simply blow your mind if you weren't so wrapped up in the gameplay. When your dedicated Packwatch reporter sat down with DKR for the first time, he didn't look up from the screen or take his hands off the controller for 2 straight hours. He missed lunch. He ignored his friends. He was hooked in a way he had never been hooked by a game before. And since he has played and reviewed literally thousands of games over the years, that's saying something. But enough gushing. Look at the screenshots. Picture the action as you fly through tunnels, bounce over waves, or squeal around corners in search of an elusive dinosaur key. The control is smoother and more intuitive than Mario Kart 64. It combines all the best elements of Super Mario 64, Pilot Wings 64, Wave Race 64, and Mario Kart 64, then somehow takes them to a new level. This is not Mario Kart 64 with a rare twist. Diddy Kong Racing is 128 megabits, Rumble Pack and Controller Pack compatible, and it stands apart from every other game. The multiplayer modes are more varied than Star Fox 64 and GoldenEye. It may well be the best game Rare has ever made, and quite possibly the best game ever made for the N64. Wow, okay.
Wow.
Look, I'm not... Far be it for me to disagree with the effervescent praise for Diddy Kong Racing, but
I think
holy
this
shit.
makes that best bowling ever look low key.
Yeah, it makes it look pedestrian and the hype. This is look. I love Diddy Kong Racing. I think it's one of the best games for the N64, but this is a bit hyperbolic. And you can see them laying on the hard sell. Not only laying on the hard sell.
It's weird to name all of these titles you previously released that you probably still want people to buy.
Yeah. Remember Mario Kart 64? Crap. You have fun with GoldenEye 64? That was bullshit. Now this is the game you've been waiting for. Fuck everything else we've released this year. Diddy Kong Racing is what you need. You can burn everything else. We don't care. It's amusing to me like how much they not only threw Mario Kart 64 under the bus to help promote this game,
they threw the bus under the bus.
Yeah, they literally threw the entire N64 library out the window in order to hype up this game, which you can see the flop sweat on Nintendo executives at this point. Like, oh shit. Like, we don't have any time to build this up. We've got to just essentially say it's the second coming of Christ and let it be that. And that being said, it did work. I mean, it worked on me. I was like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. If this Nintendo Power writer says it's better than thousands of games he's played, well, he wouldn't be lying to me. So, I mean, again, I love Diddy Kong Racing, so I'm not really going to find too much fault with this. I wish more people could be this praiseworthy of the game today. I just, intellectually, I know this is just all coming from an artificial place of wanting kids to buy the game and demand that their parents buy the game for them for Christmas and the holidays. So I can't remember, but I think before I really was able to study all of the screenshots, and there were quite a few screenshots provided on this 2-page spread. But before I even studied the player select screen in any great detail, I noticed under the little like data box on the top right-hand corner of page 2 that it said Publisher Rare. And so this was a big deal in my mind, Cameron, because just months earlier, as I previously mentioned, Nintendo Power had hammered home how big of a deal it was that Conker's Quest was going to be Rare's first self-published game. That seemed like it was a monumental thing at the time. And now here comes Diddy Kong Racing, clearly before Conker, and it's Rare's new first self-published game. That it was a game starring Diddy Kong made me jump to some inaccurate conclusions that nevertheless seem prophetic today. So, I was under the assumption that this somehow meant that Rare now owned Diddy Kong, that they either bought Diddy Kong from Nintendo or Nintendo had like given them Diddy Kong, and that this meant that possibly he and the other Kongs may never appear together in a game ever again. Like, so that was this notion I initially had, and then I remember walking back from that. And I said to Elliot, I said, so if Rare and Nintendo ever split up, if they ever somehow go their separate ways, if they ever have a breakup, this might
that'll
mean,
ever happen.
Yeah. So this might mean that Diddy Kong would have his own game series developed by Rare for whomever they develop games for, be it like the PlayStation or some other hypothetical game console that may come around, in the year 2001. Hypothetically, they could develop Diddy Kong games, and he would no longer be part of the Donkey Kong cast. So I was like, this is a possibility, Elliot. This is big. Like, this could have major consequences. I missed it by that much. I was on to something. I just didn't know what I was talking about at that time. So before I get into me noticing who else was on this player select screen, Cameron, how did you learn about Diddy Kong Racing?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how I learned about Diddy Kong Racing as far as like when I had first heard the name, when I knew it existed. But I can definitely share my first experience with it.
Sure.
I'll just say right out there, I did not own a Nintendo 64 when Diddy Kong Racing came out. I didn't own an N64 when Banjo-Kazooie came out. I didn't have an N64 until 1999, I believe. I had gotten my Super Nintendo in 1996, so you can imagine that being the first game console your parents buy you. They don't quite have a whole handle on this video game thing yet. You're not going to go and convince them to buy you a several $100 system right after you got this other one.
Exactly. Especially with a system that had a controller that looked like a claw that would, inevitably come to life and slaughter all of you in your sleep.
Right, so my first experience with Diddy Kong Racing hands-on was as a kiosk demo in, and this will date me, KB Toys. They're no longer in business. They were a competitor in the same market as Toys R Us. One had opened up near where I live, and I do still miss the aesthetic of that store because it was a really cool store to be in as a kid. I'd say the inside looked like this Nintendo Power article.
KB Toys was a mall store, though, right? Like, I don't know if there were standalone KB Toys. But
the one near where I was in a strip mall. Like, okay. It essentially a standalone store, just architecturally connected to others. But it was, okay. I'd say in terms of square footage, about as much as a Toys R Us. They had a kiosk demo of Diddy Kong Racing, and I remember playing this and being feeling like this was a kind of a surreal thing. I wasn't sure what to make of what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Because why is Diddy a huge star right now? Who are any of these characters? What? And I'm just sitting there because I know that I'm not going to be able to play this game because I don't have the system, and in about 2 minutes my parents are going to tell me to stop messing with this thing. Yeah. So I just fool with it for a little bit. I go around the character select. I pick one of the characters. I picked Bumper, I believe. And at the time I thought Bumper was a skunk because when you can't see him from behind and you don't know what a badger is, Bumper looks like a skunk.
Well, yeah, a badger is a weird animal anyway. Especially in a cartoon landscape, you would just expect a skunk,
But yeah, that was all the experience I got out of Diddy Kong Racing for a long time. until a few years later when I played it at a friend's house. And ironically, by the time I actually had the motivation to go out and get Diddy Kong Racing, it was probably around the time it was being pulled from shelves because Conker was in it.
Yeah.
Allegedly. I've never seen proof of the fact that happened, but it does seem like those copies disappeared.
It did. Diddy Kong Racing was not around by the end of the N64's life, which is unusual considering it was one of the top sellers for the system. So
this also means I did know who Banjo was at this point.
Yeah. Well, let me get into the revelation from my perspective. So looking at these Nintendo Power pages and looking at this player select screenshot, which it's amazing how Nintendo Power did not draw attention to this. This was not something they specifically pointed out. They didn't even say who the characters were in this player select screen. This was just a player select screen provided there on page 2, just amongst all the other ones, or among one of those two. And so I thought there was Diddy, although he looked a little bit weird head on in a polygonal shape. Didn't really resemble him that much.
If I'm honest, Diddy's model is a little weird in Diddy Kong Racing.
A little bit, yeah. And it was kind of hard to parse some of this out because it's
completely understandable given the nature of the hardware, but still, it's
right.
When you're used to how he looks on the Super Nintendo, this is a little bit jarring.
So this screenshot, some of the characters were in mid-blink, so it was kind of hard at first to decipher what.
Yeah, Banjo, who I think we're kind of leading up to talking about, has his eyes closed and just kind of looks like this amorphous orange and tan blob.
But see, this is where it was lucky that I'd studied everything about Banjo-Kazooie and Conker's Quest so much in the summer leading up to this, because I recognized those tight little yellow shorts so much. And I was, at first I wasn't sure. I was like, is that Banjo? And then I saw Conker, and that was unmistakably Conker. Conker's model was on point from the screenshot seen in for Conker's Quest at this point. So I knew that was Conker, and then I was able to make the leap very quickly. Well, that's Banjo. And so all of a sudden, it just got hit me. This is Banjo and Conker on the character select screen, but Banjo-Kazooie is delayed. And Conker wasn't going to be out till at least 1998. So, well, this means that Diddy Kong Racing is their debut. And by the law of perfect strangers and Harriet Winslow, this means that Banjo and Conker are technically Donkey Kong characters. Cameron, I shit you not. I started screaming like I was going in reverse from puberty. I was suddenly now prepubescent.
I'm just imagining you with a cork board and strings and pins putting this all together.
Yeah. It all ties into Hillary and Uranium One. You see. No, I Benjamin Button myself. I'd suddenly become 4 years old, and I started shrieking and jumping up and down throughout Elliot's house. I'm amazed that his parents didn't commit me right then and there. I was running through the hallway, and I distinctly remember doing a lap around the living room couch, and I was just so giddy. Elliot didn't get it. I was like, do you see what this means? And I was trying to convey what this meant as far as the Donkey Kong universe being born. I would like to think that somewhere in Twycross, Lee Loveday felt a cold chill go down his spine as this seismic moment happened. These dark clouds rolled in, and it's just the world would never be the same. Yeah, I mean, it basically the embers of DK Vine were lit right then and there, at least from my contributions. And so, I was like...
A screaming child sounds about the level of cogent we maintain to this day.
Yeah. Maybe slightly less so. So, I was like pumped. And then all of a sudden, I not only had Diddy Kong Racing to look forward to, I had Banjo-Kazooie to look forward to, I had Conker's Quest to look forward to. I was like, Diddy Kong Racing wasn't just a game, it was 3 games that I could get hyped for.
This is a weirdly under-promoted aspect of Diddy Kong Racing, too.
What?
Like
that it was their debut?
Yeah, that it featured Banjo and Conker.
Well, I mean, at that point, besides the people who had paid attention to, like, upcoming games announced that summer, Banjo and Conker were not marketable characters on their own. And what Diddy Kong Racing got to do was introduce these characters to people. I'm sure Banjo-Kazooie's success was buoyed, a little bit by Banjo first appearing in Diddy Kong Racing. And some people, I'm sure, recognized him from Diddy Kong Racing. Obviously, it being a heavily promoted Nintendo game and having that rare logo on it certainly helped it in 1998, but...
I certainly recognized Conker, and they, in retrospect, probably didn't want me to do that.
Yeah, I know. That I'm sure Nintendo, had they, known what was going to happen, would have specifically asked, can you not put Conker in the game if you're going to go down that route that we don't know you're going to go down? But that's what makes it all the more hilarious that Conker went in the direction it went into.
Maybe you could put Saber in there. Oh, wait, no.
So, I mean, besides all of that, I thought, hey, this game sounds pretty cool. I mean, ignoring the fact that this gives me Banjo and Conker in Donkey Kong's world, I thought, the hype job in this article certainly worked on me. And like I said, it's pretty shocking how much Nintendo Power, and by extension Nintendo of America, were willing to throw Mario Kart 64, I said under the bus, I'm sure it was one of those yellow school buses on Toad's Turnpike, just to make Mario Kart 64 feel more comfortable in its own demise. But, this is not something you would see Nintendo do nowadays, that they would immediately kind of pull the rug out from underneath a game that had just come out less than a year ago. This was something
that was like pretty common in the 90s in general, I'd say. Like, just undercut yourself if you have to push this new product.
I suppose so. It's just... knowing how proud Nintendo is as a company, especially when it comes to their own internal games, you would never see this at all in 2017, let alone, hell, I mean, 2002, you wouldn't have seen this.
Can you imagine, like, them attaching this kind of PR bluster to Tropical Freeze and, like, in regards to New Super Mario Bros. U?
Exactly. And maybe they should have. I mean, clearly it's effective. Maybe, I mean, what Nintendo doesn't do this enough, honestly, as far as I'm concerned, because they don't do enough to help set their titles apart. Tropical Freeze's appeal was that it was a masterclass of platforming for experienced gamers. It was a hardcore gamers game, but they did not promote it as such.
Well,
they promoted
granted, they did have one trailer that stressed it's really hard, but I think that was right before the game came out, and they kind of became aware of its reputation in, like, previews.
And it was online only. Like,
it wasn't promoted on TV as this.
Yeah. They marketed Tropical Freeze basically as another Nintendo platformer, fun for, the whole family. And they really should have, promoted Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze as, hey, if you're an experienced gamer with, some hair on your teeth, this is a game for you. This is not platforming 101 like the new Super Mario Brothers games. There's ways to kind of compare and contrast two games in your library without besmirching the name of those games. But that's almost what they did with Diddy Kong Racing versus Mario Kart 64.
It's the, if you liked this, you'll love this, not... This makes that other thing look like shit.
And it's funny how it wasn't just Nintendo who did this. It was the other big video game media outlets at the time, the other magazines. EGM, for example, I remember, really said, it's better than Mario Kart 64, and they
those statements do get walked back today.
They do, and it got walked back, I think, starting around the time of the buyout, or when the rumors of the buyout started to happen, and you would have this retroactive, oh, well, no, Mario Kart 64 was superior. And the truth is, Mario Kart 64 does some things better. Diddy Kong Racing does some things better, and it just depends on what kind of game you're looking for.
And I do see more opinions nowadays that kind of run the gamut. Some people like Mario Kart 64 better, others like Diddy Kong Racing better.
And I think Diddy Kong Racing would have a better reputation if you could actually play it on, if it was actually available in any way other than emulation or actually getting a Nintendo 64 and dusting it off. Or,
all of the insane amount of stars that had to align for Diddy Kong Racing to happen and happen as well as it did are also impeding it from ever seeing the light of day again.
Exactly. The fact that we'll get into this quite a bit on part 2 as far as like the legacy of Diddy Kong Racing, but this is a game that, again, Rare published. Rare owns most of Diddy Kong Racing. They own the tracks. They own the vast majority of the characters. The only aspects of Diddy Kong Racing Rare does not own is the name Diddy Kong Racing, the character Diddy Kong, the character Crunch, and arguably Tricky, although that is literally a tricky legal situation.
And they are still able to mention Diddy Kong Racing by name, or at the very least, no legal hammers have come down from them doing it. By name, it was mentioned in Nuts and Bolts. It's mentioned in the Banjo-Tooie XBLA remake. It's mentioned in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing with Banjo-Kazooie.
I think you can reference, like I remember on Grab by the Ghoulies, on the cover of Grab by the Ghoulies, it said from the makers of Donkey Kong Country. So I think, because Rare developed those games, you can say, hey, we developed that. But
if only I had appreciated, like, at the time, just how literal that statement was.
Right.
Like, not even the same company, literally these exact guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's just hilarious that Nintendo Power was basically talking shit about Mario Kart 64, not even like 8 months after it come out. It's just...
I'm sure there were copies still in the shrink wrap in people's houses at this time.
Yeah. So before we wrap up this episode, because this episode's going to end with the game coming out next week, we will talk about the actual game. But there were some ramifications for everything that transpired from Banjo-Kazooie being delayed, according to Nintendo Power, until March of 98, which became June of 98, and Diddy Kong Racing taking its place. The biggest corporate ramification, aside from Nintendo having to change their whole marketing strategy for that holiday season, was that Taco Bell had a planned Banjo-Kazooie tie-in, and that was obliterated by the fact that Banjo-Kazooie would no longer be a thing that holiday season. So what they had to do was essentially, and I don't know why they didn't just do a Diddy Kong Racing tie-in. Maybe it has to do with the fact that it was a Rare published game. Maybe they were just they were trying to make good.
I think as far back as this was planned, it may have just not been considered like their marquee title.
Or maybe it was the fact that they didn't have time to, like, Diddy Kong Racing was still in development, so a lot of things were touch and go, so they couldn't actually
when you go
have
through
any
all
concrete tie-ins.
All of the like prototyping you have to do for the toys, all the safety tests to make sure kids aren't going to hurt themselves with them, figure out which factories that sort of thing. There was probably a lot of planning that just had to go out the window.
Right. So Banjo-Kazooie's Taco Bell tie-in was replaced with a generic Nintendo Kids meal and something that was branded on all of the meals and the cups. It was called the Score 64 campaign. Basically, what it was these faux milk caps that had a numerical value assigned to them. And these milk caps would have a Nintendo character on them. And you would have to get up to, like, exactly 64. Or you could get one that just had 64 on it, and then you would win prizes, essentially. And so in the kids' meal, there was a Donkey Kong toy where it was Donkey Kong on a plastic palm tree, and it was like a maze. You had to get him to the top or the bottom. It was pretty lame. I would have just preferred a figure. I hated whenever these kids' meals would do these.
This is how a lot of kids' meal toys were, where they would attempt to make them into some kind of mini game, which would have the side effect of them being toys you couldn't use to interact with any of your other toys.
Right. I think it was mostly the kids' meals outside of Happy Meals for McDonald's. McDonald's, you would usually get it right. They would just give you a figure. And it was always like Taco Bell and Burger King, and that would always give you...
Burger King's Pokemon promotion for the first movie was pretty great.
No,
controversial joking hazard aside.
Well, I walked that back. Burger King had some awesome toys from their kids' meals. They had exclusive Z-Bots. I got the Z-Bots from Burger King. Anyway, so they had this shit Donkey Kong palm tree toy, which of course I got. And of course this was back when I ate meat, so I was all about Taco Bell. Taco Bell was my favorite restaurant at that point in time because I was a finely cultured child of the 90s. So of course I love Taco Bell. But not only was Donkey Kong a toy, but they also had a Mario Kart 64 themed commercial with Donkey Kong, with a CGI Donkey Kong racing Mario. And they also had a surprising but somehow appropriate amount of Funky Kong renders on Taco Bell cups and on the foam milk caps. Funky Kong was everywhere in Taco Bell. It was awesome to see.
If anybody's going to go to Taco Bell to sate their late night munchies, it's Funky Kong.
This was even before Baja Blast was available in their fountains.
I'm not just making like a haha Funky Kong's a pothead joke. That there's an actual late night munchies ad campaign from Taco Bell.
Yeah. No, Taco Bell definitely aimed that demographic and still aims that demographic to this day. Dorito tacos, my ass. So, but anyway, so I think Diddy Kong Racing did have some penetration in this Taco Bell campaign in that they had the render of Diddy Kong in his car. He was available on some of the materials at Taco Bell, but that was it. There was also a promotional VHS tape from Nintendo Power called Diddy Kong Racing, a wild racing adventure. And this is now up on our YouTube channel. We're hosting it, and so check it out. It is hosted by a faux news anchor named Trent Tillman, featuring fake reporters hamming it up, and it was one of the worst things I had seen in my young life. Cameron, what are your thoughts on this? This was no DKC exposed.
Yeah, I think among the promotional tapes Nintendo Power did, there were hits and misses. DKC Exposed is a hit. The Banjo-Kazooie video narrated by John Lovitz hit. This and their Star Fox 64 video miss for me.
And Hot News 64, the Donkey Kong 64 VHS tape, was another hit. Or was another... Well, it was a hit. It was a hit in the crotch, I should say. The thing that upset me the most about this VHS tape... And by the way, again, this is on our YouTube channel now. Check it out.
Yeah,
it's
this particular
atrocious.
aspect you're about to get to is like the most painful part of this video.
And granted...
For more than one reason.
This doesn't bother me so much as an adult, but as a kid who is fanatical about the Donkey Kong series and would get hung up on these small details, it just seemed like the people making this VHS tape had no conception of the series that I loved. So it felt like they were trying to appeal to me and missing the point entirely. And this is something I hated as a kid, was when adults would produce something for me and I could tell that they have no earthly idea what it's like to be a kid, and they have no recollection of what it was like to be a kid. It was like one of these kid pandering things that just completely missed the mark, and I felt like they were talking down to me. I hated that shit. Like, it's one reason why I loved Nickelodeon as a kid, because I always felt like classic Nickelodeon was always on my level as a kid, whereas other kid stuff, including Disney, was somehow talking down to me. Then again, I was a weird child in general.
Well, we're talking around what this is, so why don't you
explain? Okay. So what upset me the most was that in this VHS tape, which was... it was presented as if it was like a news magazine show or something. And they interviewed a human woman named Sheila Weston, and who in the context of this video was Diddy's girlfriend, who Diddy had left, by the way. He abandoned her to star in Diddy Kong Racing. I mentioned this on my Facebook, on the Facebook page for DK Vine, but this was like someone accusing your dad or brother of cheating on your mom or sister-in-law.
Some people might wonder why DK Vine's like writing around canon doesn't try to fit in absolutely every bit of promotional material and tie-in.
Yeah.
I think this is the strongest case for why we don't.
Why DK Vine has a firm only the games count as canon policy. This probably played a part in it, yeah. So, yeah.
The Star Fox manga is totally canon, though.
Viva Pinata, the cartoon series, produced in association with Rare, it's canon. So, yeah, but anyway, it was like somebody was accusing your dad of cheating on your mom. You had proof that they were lying, but you couldn't do anything to exonerate him. That's the way it felt like. I did not have any platform as a Donkey Kong fan when this VHS tape came out. So
you just put out 2 games related to the fact that he has a girlfriend.
I mean, I know Nintendo of America tried to obscure the fact that Dixie was the star of the last game, but now they're completely just erasing her from history. And plus, I just had this image of Diddy, who by the way, it was a child monkey having relations with a adult human woman. It was just upsetting on many the level.
This is, I think, a running theme too with like how characters were marketed in the 90s, because everybody wanted to have the cool, edgy mascot. Like, they couldn't just be cool. They would be oversold to the point where they're blatantly a sociopath.
I remember, like, weren't there commercials with the guy in a Crash Bandicoot costume who was just a creep in general? Like, he was just a fucking asshole, a douchebag frat bro. And I definitely remember that for Crash. It doesn't really work as well for Diddy Kong, who, despite what some people might think,
it doesn't even work the same way that like Kirby getting into a fight does, because at least that works on like an irony level. But
right. So what you're telling me, Nintendo Power, is that Diddy Kong, who at this point was a young teenager at best, stuck it in a human woman, and this human woman was fine having relations with a monkey, so much so that she used to spawn if the monkey left her. What are you telling me, Nintendo Power? No! No! But, hey, the VHS tape did get me more hyped for the game. It made me embarrassed to be a fan of Diddy Kong and Donkey Kong, but I mean, it did do its job at a very base level in that I was more hyped for the game after watching the VHS tape than I was before. It made me just because I didn't want any pre-release materials on the same level of terribleness, but yeah, I was ready to play the game then.
Yeah, I don't think Nintendo doesn't push the infidelity angle in their marketing as much anymore.
No, they've really kind of retired that. Although I don't know what, that's Nintendo of America. I haven't really kept tabs on what Nintendo of Japan's been doing. They tend to have a little bit more liberation in some of their advertising campaigns over there. But when you consider that Nintendo had to hype this game in just a little over 1 month, from not even being a thing that people knew about to basically release. They did a remarkable job. And how remarkable was it? Well, as we already mentioned, it was the most pre-ordered game of all time, setting the Guinness World Record in 1997. That's like
Fastest
the hype
selling
was
game,
off the charts.
Which I think it was overtaken within a few years, but this set the record.
This set the record for the Nintendo 64, which, had a strong debut, but by 97 was already kind of faltering in comparison to the PlayStation. This is pretty damn impressive for a game that came out of nowhere that already had to compete in the shadow of Mario Kart 64. Holy shit, so as much as we, poke fun at Nintendo sacrificing the reputation of Mario Kart 64, for as much as we whine about the quality of this promotional tape that was mailed to Nintendo Power subscribers, it did its job. People legitimately were ready for Diddy Kong Racing and bought into the hype that it was the greatest game of all time. And now, apparently it was available for rental at Blockbuster ahead of time. I did not know this, even though they say so on the VHS tape. I somehow completely missed this. Do you know anything about this, Cameron?
No, and I didn't do a whole lot of renting video games at Blockbuster. I did it a few times, but I think my parents caught on to any game I liked well enough to rent. I'd just end up buying or would be really upset when they had to take it back. So,
well, I mean, that was the point. That was you basically,
that was the entire scheme behind it. Yes.
Well, yeah, and that was how I proved to my mom, no, this is a game I like that's worth buying. It's not going to be a waste of money. It was basically laying the groundwork for the political campaign that is convincing your parents to buy you a new video game. That's all it was. It was basically the primaries before the general election of getting your parents to elect this game.
Blockbuster, KB Toys, we're just running down the defunct brands of the 90s right now.
Aren't there one or two Blockbusters still in operation? The brand is not defunct, even though it's clearly not what it used to be. I do miss the feeling of walking into a Blockbuster, though. The possibility. It was like the closest I've ever gotten to sleeping around. You know what I mean? The thrill, the possibilities. You get to sample this wide array of options. I miss that. It's something that Redbox or Netflix or...
It was great because you would run into a lot of stuff that you weren't necessarily looking for, but it would be out of print and obscure because nobody wants it, so the only place it is in the video rental store. It's
something that our current way of experiencing media doesn't capture.
I'm not going to run into Target and see Ewoks and Jason X on the shelf.
Right. I also miss the smell of Blockbuster. It's weird.
Which is what I remember from the last time I looked at a Blockbuster before they closed.
Do you remember the smell of Blockbuster? It smelled like...
Yeah.
It's like
popcorn and plastic?
Yes, the plastic smell is what I'm thinking about. I miss that plastic. I don't know. Scent is always a very strong, nostalgic thing for me. The Virtual Boy, Blockbuster. I would totally sniff the hell out of a Blockbuster right about now. But anyway, I digress.
That's going to be on Out of Context.
Yes, I was thinking, I haven't provided Out of Context with anything worthwhile this episode. Let me help.
If you're on Twitter, please follow that account.
There's some things they dredge up, though, that I'm like, oh, there's no way we said that. But then again, it is out of context, so who knows? Now, although it technically came out November 24th, I need to point out that release dates for video games back then were a little bit looser. So, for example, it would have maybe shipped on the 24th, or stores would have started to be expecting arrivals November 24th.
Street dates weren't like strictly enforced like they are now, I think, because, well, the internet, I think, plays a part in that, because once it's out there, it's out there. You don't put the genie back in the bottle.
Right. Eventually, video games got to be such a big industry that they adopted the same protocol that music and books and other forms of media have with strict release dates. But so I know that the stores in my area weren't expected to get it in until November 26th, which was a Wednesday. And I had it reserved at Toys R Us for my birthday, which was November 22nd. So, I mean, this is how big of a Donkey Kong universe fan I was back then, even. That as a kid, I was willing not to have a birthday present on my actual birthday. I was willing to wait 4 days for my birthday present, and that's how bad I wanted it. So I had it reserved at Toys R Us. November 26th was the day before Thanksgiving, which meant early release from school. Schools would get out in my area, like, I think it was like 12:30 or something, or 1 o'clock dismissal or something, the day before Thanksgiving, and then would be off Thursday, Friday, 4-day weekend. So my mom also got off early from work. She worked, I think, at the university at that time, so she got off early. So she was able to pick me up that day with the game already in hand. And so I got home, ripped open the shrink wrap, devoured the instruction manual, and then arranged for my friend Elliot to come round to the old house. And together we would make our first trip to Timbers Island. To be continued.
This has been a File 2 production.
Qué rico.